Let's kick things off this morning with NVIDIA. It is the new market cap king, of course, topping Microsoft and Apple in terms of valuation. Not only that, Mike, but you can look at the entire UK market or various bourses all around the world.
Yes, $3 trillion is real money no matter how you slice it, $3+ trillion. And multiple things can be true at once, I think. It can be mostly fundamentally based. It can be mostly following earnings momentum. It can be about this story that's, obviously getting to the bottom line of NVIDIA faster than anywhere else. And it could also be about pure momentum and an overshoot and a complete kind of blow-off type action. So no way to know where one stops and the other begins. But the way it's piling on market cap, I think the big question is everyone's telling themselves, but the multiple was higher a year ago. But it was higher. Right. Not really, because back then earnings estimates were way too low based on what we know that they reported. So the fabulous profitability of this company definitely gives it a buffer and a reason for people to get excited. But you also probably have to start believing that subsequent, like looking out from here over the next 2 years, those estimates as published now are vastly too low to really get excited about it.
And the growth, the pace of growth should continue. I mean, should meaning
yes.
In order to sustain this sort of run. I mean, the argument has been, we've seen this before where there has been such excitement, such momentum behind one stock seen as the #1 winner and a huge secular trend like the internet. We saw that with Cisco.
Yeah.
And what's happened with Cisco? It didn't see a quarter-on-quarter decline. It just saw the growth slowing.
Yeah.
And what happened? We saw significant drawdowns during Cisco's reign as sort of the backbone of the internet.
You had a lost decade plus. But although I was looking back in terms of the actual profitability of Cisco, it was unremarkable, actually. It was mostly about sales growth and how everyone assumed the internet was so far from getting fully built out and they had this head start. So I was looking back in 2000, Cisco earns $2.6 billion on $19 billion in revenue.
It's like a rounding error.
It's kind of prosaic in terms of margins, whereas NVIDIA, it's like 54% net margins on $160 billion expected revenue this year. When Apple first got to the net income number that NVIDIA is expected to get to this year, it was like 4 years ago, Apple had more than twice the revenue. So that's your question. Can they somehow sustain that outsized share of AI-related hardware profit?
You're referring to this journal piece earlier in the week, looking at the similarities between NVIDIA and Cisco. They actually talked to John Chambers about this very analog. He says the speed of change is different, the size of the market is different, the stage when the most valuable company was reached is different. Says
John Chambers, VC investor in AI projects.
And the former chief of Cisco.
Yes, of course.
No, that is true. I think, I don't know enough to say, but people who do know enough to say will tell you NVIDIA's technological advantage. It seems as if it's so distinct that they can continue to maintain this kind of lead. But again, who knows? I
mean, even take a look at AMD, right? AMD was seen as the closest competitor to NVIDIA for a long time. It's really fallen by the wayside, and right now, year to date, it's only up 4%. I mean, it's doing worse than the retailers at this point. So it's really fallen off a cliff as people are really seeing NVIDIA as the beneficiary, the winner there. It really seems to be pulling out in front.
We continue to look for how big the halo can get. Dell, of course, talking to Sarah earlier in the week about their efforts in AI. Accenture today is going to open up 8. A lot of that is on their guidance behind selling Gen AI services, even though the quarter itself wasn't that hot.
And we had the tweet from Musk saying that Dell is going to be one of the providers of the huge server factory. It's going to be an insane factory, a super factory for AI. It's going to be very exciting. But Dell's up 4% on it.
I still think it's a relatively tight circle of conviction about who the beneficiaries are. I know that there's various different baskets of AI potential beneficiaries, and they've been mixed in terms of how they perform. Bespoke has one that's been doing great, depending on how you weight NVIDIA in there. But others, I think we're really slow to basically say the people investing in these data centers, in these technologies, are going to get a quick payback. I think aside from Microsoft, where, guess what, today they're getting paid for it, right? So that's the difference right now. So maybe that's a bull case for this spreading at some point. But again, it comes down to what share of the overall pool of profits is NVIDIA going to continue to hang on to. And also, no matter what you think about that, if you just look at the fevered level of daily trading activity in the stock, in the leverage instruments around it, in the call options. It just sort of shows you it's a fever for now. And that could be on top of a legitimate basis, but you got to know kind of what the bets being laid today are in terms of how aggressive you have to be in your assumptions.
And a lot of the bets are passive, and so that could really make this sort of phenomenon last a little bit longer than we all think. The amount of passive funds, ETFs, that have NVIDIA as a top holding,
so here's
to.
the thing. Here's why I try to get my head around the math there.
Oh, you're going to poo-poo this?
No. But why would the biggest, most followed, most beloved company in the index be a disproportionate beneficiary of passive flows relative to the ones that are forgotten, who each gets $1 in proportion to their market cap size? So there's a small effect. If active investors are underweight the biggest stocks, which in general they are, then you're kind of buying it. The passives are buying it from somebody else. But what we have today is massive differentiation within the index. So you have the median S&P stock. I just looked this morning on a quarter-to-date basis, down 4.5%. That's how much the market cap weighted index is up on a quarter-to-date basis.
SPW's underperforming SPX by double digits.
Yeah.
And if it does that again for the full year, it'll be 2 years in a row. We've never done that.
I've never done it. So you're kind of, the compounding at the top is kind of taking on a bit of a life of its own. And that's why I feel as if it's almost like there's just no sellers in those stocks. And so, it becomes a matter of, if I'm an active manager and I love the story, am I going to have 6.5% each in NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft in an active portfolio? Probably not.
No.
You're probably going to own 20, 30 stocks.
Yeah.
And so therefore you're always going to feel like you're behind. And so there's not a lot of net selling on the way up.
Yeah.
And the top story is, again, incredible NVIDIA. Here is the pre-market quote. Yes, NVIDIA is up again almost $5, reaching $140 a share. It is now solidly the most valuable publicly traded company, well over $3.3 trillion. Yes, it is. $140 a share, up nearly $5, 3.5% up more. Looks like it's surging again, Lauren.
I'm just going to say it. This tree will grow to the sky in the next 12 to 18 months. That's according to Dan Ives of Wedbush. He says the $4 trillion valuation entirely possible, not just for NVIDIA, but also Microsoft and Apple because of the AI industrial revolution. So AI offers upside for the big three, but also Ives names AMD, Dell, Amazon, Meta, Google, and Oracle. He's estimating $1 trillion of AI spending in the next decade.
He's got a lot to do with NVIDIA to $140 a share, I do believe. Well, look who's here. He was grimacing, as we say, whilst he was listening to your discussion of
I might have felt it. I might have felt the vibe this way.
Put him on the air. Put him on the screen. This is David Barnson, I believe is his name. So what do you think? Does this remind you of the dot-com bubble?
Of course it does, and it's not about .com. What happened during the .com bubble was there were a lot of worthless companies that went way up and then they went away. Pets.com, those old Super Bowl commercials. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about, because NVIDIA is a very profitable company and a big company, but like Cisco and Microsoft and Intel in 1999, they went way, way up, priced in 30 years of gains in 5 minutes, and then they spent 16 years not going up at all. And by the way, Cisco still isn't back to where it was in 1999. That's exactly what's happening in NVIDIA. I have no idea when it's going to stop, but with someone like Dan Ives saying it's got another $1 trillion of market cap to go, that's the kind of thing that marks the moments where we're going to look back and go, boy, what were we thinking? And I don't know if it's in a week, a month, or a year, but it's going to happen. And you heard it here first on Varney Co. on Fox Business.
Actually, there are others who said exactly that.
But not right now today.
Not today, this very moment.
On the longest day of the year.
You're just being technical, that's all. All right.
There is so much to dissect when it comes to NVIDIA because there are so many things happening at once. You have a behemoth company with a very distinct technological advantage over their competitors, and the largest corporations in the world are practically waiting at NVIDIA's doorstep for the latest release of their products. Amazon, Microsoft, Tesla, Meta, Dell, and the list just keeps on going. And so you have a situation where the underlying business is doing fantastic. I'll briefly share a snippet from NVIDIA's latest earnings report. The company not only saw enormous revenue growth year over year, but also a substantial increase in profit margin. When it comes to the fundamentals of the business, NVIDIA is absolutely crushing it. At the same time, I have to be honest, I am genuinely concerned about the exuberance surrounding NVIDIA. Please do not misunderstand what I am saying here. I would not be surprised at all if NVIDIA continues to rally in the months ahead. especially so if we continue to get strong earnings over the next couple quarters. What I'm concerned about is the potential for growth prospects and forward-looking guidance to eventually soften. I don't know when that will happen. It could be 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now. I don't know. Let me give an analogy that I think will help explain what I'm thinking. Think about when the first 10 or so iterations of the iPhone came out. Each time a new generation launched, there was often a lot of demand and enthusiasm for the new phones because there were distinct improvements from one generation to the next. But now, we go from the iPhone 14 to the iPhone 15, and let's be honest, there's not that much of a difference. Sure, you might have a camera with more megapixels, and you might have a slightly nicer display. But let's be real, there's not that much of a difference between the new model and the model that preceded it. And that's sort of what I'm thinking about when it comes to NVIDIA. Right now, the largest corporations in the world are waiting at NVIDIA's doorstep for their latest generation of products, and there are very clear improvements from one generation to the next. My concern is that we may eventually get to the point where the new generation of chips isn't that much different from the prior generation and demand may dwindle. Again, I don't know when that may happen. It may not happen until 10 or 20 years from now. I don't know. For now, I think that if the overall market continues to rally, or at the very least doesn't have a significant pullback, and we continue to get both strong earnings and strong forward-looking guidance from NVIDIA over the next couple quarters, then I think the stock has more room to run. At the same time, I am cautiously optimistic when it comes to the long-term future of NVIDIA because I think to myself, what happens when forward-looking guidance or demand eventually softens? Again, I don't know what the future holds, and for all I know NVIDIA could continue running for decades. I don't know. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.